Chapter 5 of Circle of Hands, the new RPG from Adept Press, written by Ron Edwards, is called Killing. Normally in an RPG we might have a combat section or something like that, or conflict, but I think giving it this bald title of Killing serves the game very well. That's, after all, what it purports to be about. It's about the decision between characters to try to kill one another. It's not about battles for territory or large groups of knights and things cascading across the landscape for king and country. It's not about that. It's about somebody deciding someone else must die, that violence is the only solution, and lethal violence at that. The game purports to bring this about in a grim and gritty way, as we've been hearing all the way through. It does spend some time talking about realism, which we've talked about on the channel in times past when we looked at framing roles and when we look at the concept of premature imagination. Right? Those concepts are brought out in about a page and a half in the opening realism section. Then it gets directly into setting it up. Now this chapter runs from page 93 to page 110. The actual system starts on page 94 and goes through. It's divided into sections. There's a section specifically for fighting named characters. There's a section on fighting unnamed characters. There's a section on fighting groups. And as you move through the chapter, it's neatly divided up into concepts as they will occur. So first it's how to set up play, what to do with the dice, and then dealing damage, armor, ranged combat, no weapons, weapons, improvised weapons, mounted combat, and dying. So it reads pretty smoothly. And once you get into play, particularly if you follow the game's good advice that you don't have to do all the heavy lifting yourself as the game master, things can be parceled out to other people around the table. The game master just has to focus on the outcomes, narrating the outcomes, really, when it comes down to it. Having people help lightens the load, makes it faster, makes it fun. It seems like a pretty quick system once you get the hang of it, so let's actually talk about it. As mentioned earlier, the game is envisioned for a theater of the mind context, which is pretty standard. So it begins with what's referred to as a snapshot. Right? When it comes down to combat, the game master steps in and from their perspective, right, having heard everything that's gone on in the scene that has led up to the point of people deciding to kill one another, the game master then feeds this back as positioning. From this point, right, from these spatial relationships in this terrain, in this place, this violence is about to happen. And all subsequent decisions and action choices will stem forward from that one point. I find this level of clarity to be useful and clear. I think it's probably common practice amongst most long-term game masters. It's nice to see it written out in a procedural way. This is something that's usually just glossed over. A combat section or a killing section will begin with things like roll initiative, gather your dice pool, and things like this, and doesn't actually talk about setting the scene. And setting the scene really is important in terms of being able to move forward confidently and frame all the subsequent roles and interactions. So that's good to see. Once that snapshot is in place, we get down to the killing. Now, this game dispenses with the idea of rolling for initiative, and I think a lot of people out there will be happy about that. Initiative, comes and goes in its appreciation or in fads. This game dispenses with it, in a sense. And it's time to put up a neat graphic. Circle of Hands uses this visual metaphor of a clock to help organize the ongoing chaos of combat. Now, While initially characters are arranged according to their quickness trait, this will not be their arrangement for very long. The book explains by using the alphabet, arranging the quickest characters at the head of the alphabet and proceeding from A through F. Just using a sheet of paper and tokens, arranging the characters in order with the first character to act going at the 3 o'clock position and the rest arrayed behind them back toward 12, combat is ready to begin. Once it begins, this order will become interrupted and very thoroughly mixed again and again and again as events play out. So, with this interesting clock metaphor controlling the conflict, the chaos of combat, and allowing for an easy setup based on quickness, and then all of the different changes that will happen as a result of interaction or as a result of decision, then initiative becomes an entirely different animal. The combat section then moves into the idea of noticing and surprise. There aren't rules in place for sneaking up to stab someone in the back, or are there? This game moves from the point of view that we declare intentions. And then we'll either be successful or we won't. So if you've declared trying to stab another fighter in the skirmish in the back, if your roll is successful, then you did that, and it has its results. If your roll was not successful, then clearly you were seen, and you did not launch an attack from surprise. Nice and simple. What this allows people to easily track is the changes in combat based on what people do. Once you have actually acted, your counter moves around to the back of the line. But it's not just a circular sequence. This sequence is not set in stone, and many things can interrupt it. Players declare only intentions of action, what their character is seen to be beginning, building on the snapshot provided by the GM at the start of the conflict. And from there, things will play out in a logical sequence. But the sequence itself can be interrupted, and events will rearrange it. 3 ways provided by the rules for altering this order are to spend a point of your character's brawn, to choose to go to the head of the line, appearing at 3 o'clock. 2, being pulled into a clash, meaning being drawn to 3 o'clock to work things out with the character there. Or 3, receiving an injury and losing quickness. So, what is a clash? Plain and simple, a clash is when characters attack each other with the intent to do harm. A clash does not occur if a character is simply taking an action, such as running away or using some other kind of skill. But when one character is trying to wreak harm on another character, then this is when a clash occurs, and this is what a clash is. And so in terms of the initiative cycle, the character who is stating the intended action, or the player who's stating the intended action to do this harm, pulls the target of that violence into the clash. And both characters then have their opportunity to resolve actions. The person who is considered to be the target, the person who's pulled into the clash, the person who's targeted by the violence, they have the opportunity to simply defend themselves or to duke it out. If they make that second choice, if they go for the opportunity to return violence themselves, then this is essentially moving them ahead in initiative, and we resolve that, and then both characters go to the end of the line again. So it's pretty simple to resolve, and the visual metaphor of this clock keeps things flowing smoothly and prevents the normal confusion that might come up in a fluid initiative system about whose turn is it. You don't have to count like you would in aces and eights. You don't have to keep track of scores like you do in most games. It reminds me most of the approach taken in Fantasy Flight's Star Wars game, where initiative is determined and then there are slots to fill and it's fluid. Now in that game, the group simply decides who goes next as long as everybody goes once. This system allows players to combine that tactical freedom, or those tactical choices, with the results returned from the system. Clashes aren't simply a matter of rolling dice and trying to do better than the other person's roll. There's the concept of commitment, which is explained next. And what this is your ability to prioritize attack and defense. Combat is resolved through 2d6 rolls. This is basically an opposed roll. The attacker and the defender both roll a black die and a white die, and these are added together for a sum. To that sum is added quickness. The difference between the two rolls will determine if someone takes damage or not. Now, to this simple concept is added the idea of commitment. This is where more tactics enter play. Player characters, named characters, monsters may change the balance between how their quickness is added to their rolls. Assuming we have a quickness of 5, then 5 would be added to the value I rolled for attack, and 5 added to that same value for defense. But I could weight attack or defense more heavily from that pool of 10 points. I could put it all into attack, right? Adding 10 points to my attack, adding 0 points to my rolled value for defense. I could do it the other way around, or whatever combination in between, right? 8 and 2, for example. So, what this gives us is a conflict resolution system built around the idea of characters choosing to kill or be killed. The resolution system flows from a stated intent, which could be interrupted at any time by any other character. Physical clashes are characters calling out specific other characters and engaging with them directly to the exclusion of what's happening elsewhere. The melee, the interaction is chaotic, and the way that it flows across the table is in constant shift. Characters are getting involved, getting pulled into conflicts over here, being interrupted by this effect over there, being knocked down, killed, or maimed. Players have lots of options. This is not a system where there are listed maneuvers to apply and mix and match. This is where you state your intention. Success is determined by the dice. Narration flows from the die results, where you have the option to, when attacked by someone else, to focus on them and return the attack and get involved in a clash, or simply defend yourself and move on to what it was that you were trying to do. If you get caught in that clash, then you must finish it. This is a fight to the end. You're there to kill the other person. If you choose to defend yourself and move on, you may wind up in a battle between 2 or 3 individuals. These are real decisions. The decision to act faster, to push harder, to be able to get the person that you want to kill down before they can do the same to you, involves investing points of brawn. Brawn which will be taken away by damage that you receive during the course of the combat. Interesting stuff. There is a lot in the combat chapter. There's a lot on armor. There are important rules about what happens if quickness is reduced to 0 but brawn has not been, or the reverse. What does it mean if you're fighting unarmed and in this clash you decide you want to take them out, kill them with your bare hands? How is that done? What does it mean if you are, charged by a group, or you're fighting a group of unnamed characters? How are these things resolved? I'm not going to go into that in this clip, partly because I've just only recently regained my voice this week, which is part of the reason for the delay of this clip. But one thing that we do definitely need to talk about is advantage. In the conceit of the game, someone in a combat always has the advantage. It's not always the same someone. And the 2d6 roll will be advantaged by the red die each and every time it comes up in a clash. So let me say that again. Assuming a clash between two opponents, right? Each rolls 2d6, one black die, one white die. They both roll this. They both total those up and add their quickness. But one of them, just one, also receives the red die to add to their total. They receive the advantage. This is determined by the game master. This is determined through understanding the narrative circumstances which have arisen by everything which has happened before. Okay? Whether that's the snapshot in the very first attack of the combat, or whether the combat has been roiling around for a while. It's determined like this. What just happened? What are the physical circumstances? What are the weapons being employed? And who pulled whom into the clash? So let's take a look at those. What just happened? Has someone just taken damage from an attack? Are they reeling back? Likely they don't have the advantage. What are the physical circumstances? Uphill, downhill, upstairs, downstairs, behind cover, ranged weapon versus having to charge in. Right? What are the circumstances? Are they fighting around furniture? What are the weapons being employed? Am I in a position where my really, really long weapon is an advantage, keeping you away from me, or a disadvantage, preventing me from maneuvering in these tight enclosed spaces? Who pulled whom into the clash? Right? Who has attacked? Who's going to hit first unless something else happens? Right? These are the basis of determining advantage, and will become second nature after a while, I think. Damage taken is determined by the difference between an attack and a defense roll. A successful attack versus a less successful defense will yield points which reduce brawn and quickness, the total divided between the two of them. This slowly wears the fighters out, leaves uncertainty, but how hurt am I? And then when each is reduced to 0, when both reach 0, the character is out of the fight. Before then, if one is reduced and the other not, then the character is visibly harmed, visibly impeded, struggling to maintain their ability to attack and defend themselves. If this is, in fact, quickness, which is remaining, then their split is determined for them. It all has to go into attack. It all has to go into defense. Limited types of armor exist, primarily mail, helms, shields, and it has value. It's something to don when you know you're going into a fight. It will make the difference, possibly, between who dies and who survives to kill another day. But it is not something which will turn you into an unstoppable powerhouse. It's not something that makes combat something to laugh at. It's just one more way to augment your fighting prowess to give you an edge in combat. Even though the main characters, the Circle Knights, are described in the book as being badasses, of being, say, the practitioners of a type of magic never before seen, this gray magic. Even so, with all their advantages, they can and certainly will fall in combat. One aspect of play is that it doesn't take the Circle Knight completely out of the knight's venture. Because of their ties to gray magic, they will rise as wraiths and can still interact with the scenes. They may be interacting with other race. They may be interacting with characters who have survived. It's not until the venture ends that the character is truly gone. Chapter 5, Killing, offers a lot more than what I've talked about already. Of special note, if you're getting into it, take a look at the cultural elements which come out as the author talks about ranged combat, mounted combat, and armor, as these things apply to use, how they are used, when they're not used, what has not yet developed, what's in the process of developing, what will develop. We're not going to get into that in this video. My voice is starting to go again. So, Chapter 5 offers a very gritty, very personal combat system as advertised on the back of the book. It is not wholly abstracted, oh, I've lost some points of damage and I'll feel better tomorrow kind of combat. It comes with consequences, that these are determined primarily through the narrative, through applying logic to the scene, is something which may be challenging for people who haven't played that way before, may be refreshing for people who prefer to play that way. It's hard to say. But it does open up the opportunity to make each encounter personal, make each encounter carry the weight of possible permanent change to the character through the result of maiming or other outcomes, and certainly carries with it the sting of likely death. Combat is serious in the Circle of Hands, and it carries with it a sense of, if one were to go for a very, let's use the word realistic, a realistic edge to combat, there's nothing in this game, I feel, which is going to get in your way. So that's something. The next chapter we'll talk about is on magic. Finally, we're getting down to the real nuts and bolts of things, and the last part of what characters can and cannot do will be revealed to us in Chapter 6, Gray Magic.